Hey, I missed your face.
Oh, it's right here.
I, I'm really happy to see you. I was going to talk to you about putting together, some of the things that we had discussed about uh, trying to get that language right, about
Hmm.
how to engage people in government, and then we could probably do another um, portion of it about funding foundations and funding circles and venture capitalists and different ways to do that. Like we need, it's not a playbook, it's a handbook, right? It's really like language and where to go. And I think there's definitely an opportunity. I was on a call last week with some NLC people, so
National,
League
which
of
I'll see. Yep.
Yeah. So they're working with us around the mayor's stuff,
Hmm.
around the mayor's conference. So there are people there. There's somebody there that's like intrigued about doing this too. So it's like you, Skylar, the NLC person, and Eric come to mind as like the people that have been involved in cities. And look, and here's Peter, another person I was thinking about who would be great for that conversation. Since he works with governors. Hello. Oh, look at you with the interesting background. Um, yeah. So I want to put a pin in it because I want to talk offline about it because there's
Yep.
some interesting opportunities that are coming forward. So we will definitely be in touch. So Peter and Scott, expect an email about a playbook. No, a handbook. Did I say handbook, Scott?
Yeah. Handbook.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll look for the email.
Okay. So Peter, I'm talking about a handbook of how to talk to people in different circles, and particularly like government entities and
Okay.
policymakers. And then I think Dia would be ideal to talk to people that are like focused on economic development because she lives in that economic development world where it's slightly nuanced lingo from ecosystem building world. And um, and there are people like Dell and a couple of other people that would be really great for that. And Peter, you're like the overlap. So we're
Okay.
we're percolating a lot of things. So things are things are getting really exciting. Hello, Norris. You're in the fog. I cannot see you, but I know you're there. Um,
Yeah, by the way, I decided to bring my staff with me to this meeting.
I saw that. My cousin's kids are like all about those. I Scott, is your son into these
Paw Patrol?
Paw Patrol pups? You have any idea what we're talking about?
Well, there are two Scotts. I'm not sure which one.
I'm probably
Oh, I'm talking
two
about
years.
Scott Resnick.
In what you're talking about, I'm 2 years old.
Oh, okay.
The one,
You're
the Scott with the 2 year old. I'm sure. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
1 to 2
Scott with the
years away.
two-year-old is definitely into Paw Patrol, right? I don't think Scott Gillespie's quite into Paw Patrol. I don't know. Okay. We'll
There's
give
a
everybody another minute or so, and then we'll let's see. What's a good popcorn question today? I feels like who are you keeping company with? And now we know who Peter's keeping company with in the thing. Norris, are you with us, or are you just kind of out in the fog in Idaho?
Not in the fog, just saving bandwidth.
Okay, good.
It's been well, I have it probably better. I don't want to jinx myself by saying it, but I can take the I can walk the dogs in the hills, and I have access to a hot tub, which is kind of
Okay.
underwhelming by yourself. But
Okay.
that Pandora and Spotify go offline, I'm really screwed. But I'm just one Zoom call after another. I have a online meeting with, we just recently relaunched the Idaho Women's Business Center. So and they're getting extra money through CARES. So we've actually got some money to spend on some essentially ecosystem building stuff. So it's nice to be able to get some things going. And I've got to prepare power slides for, there's a huge online entrepreneurship conference on Thursday that I will be speaking at. So, and would have been nice if I hadn't been told this, before Saturday. Wait, it's Thursday. Oh God.
Thursday.
Anyway.
Yes.
So,
but I'm sharing that info.
They want to hear. I'm going to get to talk about ESHIP, share what we're doing there, but it'll be interesting because it's an education focused thing, which is something that is not really and been much of a conversation under ESHIP. So there's a possible synergy. One of the co-hosts of this is the world's largest academic entrepreneurship group, and their executive director wants to help push some projects forward. So that will be an interesting negotiation, but it's nice working with people who are very action oriented, but a little scary at the same time. So I will keep you posted, and I'm going to hang out here. And
okay.
Especially since I found out if you use Zoom properly, I don't know if you have the right kind of account, but you can actually monitor what else people are doing on their computer. Like,
ooh.
Norris is on Microsoft Solitaire, or
oh my gosh.
Yeah, actually can spy it. It's not spying, it's monitoring. But that's I'm thinking makes me want to go play solitaire, but
well, now we know.
I'm making hand gestures, or at least I'm making hand gestures with the camera off.
That we can't see.
Anyway, good to see various folks there. And
here's what I'm going to do, Norris. Here's something to keep your hands busy. Why don't you help scribe? So I'm going to drop the agenda. See how I did that? I'm going to drop the agenda right into the chat so that people can help. Maybe fill out your own names so we can keep track of who's on the call as we put it out on the onto the dashboard for other people to catch up if they are missing this call. Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. It's nice to see all of you ish. I know it's been quite a challenge, and most of you have probably been on more Zoom calls than you might care to think about. So let me ask you as a popcorn question, just to check in and see how everyone's doing. Tell me about maybe a G or PG-13 rated guilty pleasure during this time. So what have you been doing to keep yourself sane and entertained during this shutdown? So I'm going to call on Peter.
Boy, that was quick. So it happens that Chicago's mayor of 1 year term has served as the sort of city's inspiration for dealing with the shutdown. So I'll share with you an example of this through chat somehow. But anyway, what it is that Lori Lightfoot's a rather diminutive African-American woman who has a rather severe countenance at times. And so now she's been going around and she's been popping up in various memes with her picture. And she's scolding people in these various memes to behave themselves. And it's gotten to be an absolute hoot where she shows up. There's one meme, which I probably shouldn't share, is of her standing in front of the cave and Jesus is coming out of it and she's telling him to go back in. Another is there's a famous painting of in the Art Institute of people in Paris in the park, and it's her picture all of a sudden being superimposed and everybody in the picture disappearing. And so she's just been all over the place, standing in front of police barriers and so forth. And it's been an absolute hoot. So we're all sort of just amusing ourselves as we sit in our homes. In my case, always fully clothed, but trying to make sense of everything. And I'll throw this over to Shrida, or Dia, I'm sorry.
You're good. Let's see. I see a few new people. So I'm Dia and I'm in Ada, Oklahoma. And something I've been doing is just working out and taking short breaks, which you can't really do if you were in the office. And it's, I like it. I like this new way to stay more healthy, but also like mentally like more productive. So that's what I've been doing. And let's see, Hassan, would you want to go next?
Sorry, I missed the, I had to step away for a minute and I missed the question.
What's your guilty pleasure, PG-13 or G-rated guilty pleasure during this, during your sheltering in place?
Yeah, it hasn't changed in the last couple of weeks. It's been trying to figure out play tunes that I'm hearing. So I've got a synthesizer not too far from where I'm sitting, and I try to figure out some of the tunes that I'm listening to. So, yeah, I'm not sure who hasn't gone yet.
So the only ones that have gone are Peter and Dia.
Okay. Amy?
I was distracted looking up Ada, Oklahoma, because I feel like I've been there before, and I'm just, like, who would know Ada? I mean, unless you've been there or driven through, you wouldn't know it. So I was just thinking about that. Anyway. Okay, so guilty pleasure that I can speak about. I was watching until last week, Portrait Artist of the Year, and it is kind of guilty and maybe not G-rated because I'm watching whole episodes on YouTube, which I'm sure is not okay, but I don't know, it's there, so I'm watching it. But anyway, I've been enjoying that. It's a British show, and it's a competition, but everybody's nice to each other, so it's not like Shark Tank. And you can watch them actually do the paintings in 4 hours. I mean, you don't watch for 4 hours, they edit it, but you're watching them make, half a dozen people make these portraits of somebody sitting right there. So anyway, very inspiring. So I'll call on, we have 2 Scots. Did either of the Scots go? How about Scott Gillespie?
Thanks, Amy, I think. 3 G-rated pleasures. One is I'm cleaning the basement, which I've been tasked with for probably 2 years since we moved here. And there's all kinds of treasures I'm finding and getting organized for different people to distribute. 2 is we're rebuilding our chimney, which we didn't know was broken, but we found out it was broken just before C-19 hit, and we got partway through rebuilding our chimney. So we've got a couple people helping with that. And the 3rd one is I'm in contact with a whole bunch of people that I haven't been in contact with normally through work or family, to be in touch and try to assist them. And that has been an enjoyable outcome, including mentoring some students at university who are really hung out and not sure what they're doing. Let's see, Scott Resnick, since it's a good name.
Our parents named us well, Scott. Yeah, so what have I been doing? So we have been, my 2-year-old son and I have been seeking out all of the badgers that are around Madison and around campus. So we've been going on marathon walks
You're breaking up a little bit.
for the for these statue badgers. So that's my G-rated activity. The other activity is if you, yeah, I'm stopping my video here. Hopefully that's better. I'll just pass at this point.
Why don't you type it in the chat? And Norris, what's your G-rated or guilty pleasure you can share?
Well, I shared it. One is the being on the edge of civilization, that being able to get out and walk up and down hills with crazy dogs is certainly it's quite the blessing. I think that yesterday we were looking up, and you hear that screech and you look up, and it couldn't have been more than 50 feet up, but was a big honking bald eagle. And I'm sure it was thinking, could I eat? I swear he wasn't looking at the dogs to eat. He was looking at me. So, but a lot of, like everyone else, a lot of binge TV, but I'm getting a lot of work done, and a lot of thinking about and sharing the story. There was this, in the 1600s, when the Black Plague hit England, there was this arrogant, jackass young student who was forced to leave Cambridge and take his books and go home to the farm while the plague went on. Oh, this guy turned out to be Isaac Newton. And he said later, if he hadn't had that sort of nearly a year of self-isolation, he would not have become the mathematician that he was. And so I'm trying to take heart in that and seeing I'm not going to be Newton, but figuring out ways to, to think about things. Somebody said they talked to people I hadn't talked to in a while. I have talked to more people I haven't talked to in 10 years in forever. It's astounding how much some people have changed and how little others have changed. So that's very encouraging. So I'm looking up at it. I think, am I the last one? I think I'm the last one to go. So thanks for asking. And
Sure.
yeah, I'm
gonna
catching up with random people from my life.
That's great. So sometimes you remember why they're no longer in your life, and sometimes you're like, oh, it's great to have them back, right? So there's a mixed blessing in that. I'm having virtual mini reunions with my high school classmates every week. So that's been fun and interesting to see everybody, and the people that liked you or didn't like you way back when and why is pretty apparent. So the other thing that I've done, I've been starting to practice as being offline on at least one day a week. I will watch some TV, but not responding, not being on social media has been giving me sanity. Alongside that, I bought an adult swear word coloring book. So I am coloring with some interesting words I would show you, but this call is being recorded. So anyway, it's got some very interesting choice terminology in there. So last month, we talked a little bit about how to bring people into the ecosystem that don't know they're a part of that. And part of that discussion touched on the fact that we don't speak the same language. Scott Resnick was talking about how, we ask certain people, and this conversation has come up a lot, we ask certain people for things that they're not able or capable or have the bandwidth or actually the responsibility of offering, right? We ask for funding from certain funding entities that cannot fund us in that way. We ask policymakers to do things because we only know to ask, but we don't speak the language, nor do we know. So I'd like to, in the effort of helping, so let me back up one step. As everybody knows, the ESHIP Summit has been postponed We will not be convening at the end of June as we had addressed. We are working on how and when to convene. The when to convene is still pretty up in the air, and how depends on what state the world is in as to whether we're convening virtually or a hybrid of, or in person, or what that looks like. And so we're trying to design for all of those things. Regardless, we're really moving forward with the idea that we all know that we can't build an ecosystem by ourselves. Ecosystem building is a team sport. You cannot do it by yourself, no matter how much you try. So the idea of bringing people into the ecosystem is one thing, but let's think about some of the challenges of trying to engage people in the ecosystem. What are things that you're coming up against? Is it that you don't know who to invite? Is it that there's too many people in an ivory tower that is unreachable or won't return calls, or their community czars? I know that Norris and I have had many conversations on community czars and gatekeepers and things, and there's and then I have to step back and say, one of the conversations that I've had is that people only model the behavior that they see. So we've not shown them how else to show up. And so they just keep following the way that other people have shown up in the past, which leads to really crappy examples of this. And I think that perpetuates the gatekeeper and the communities are. I'm not saying that they're all not knowing. I'm just saying that that's some of the grace that I've tried to share. So I'm curious to hear from you. What is it? What are the challenges that you're seeing? How you've worked around it or worked through it, and so that we can put down. And it would be really helpful if you could put down some of these tips and bits of advice in the agenda, so we could capture them and maybe share with other people. So I don't want to necessarily call on anybody, but I want to open it up to that discussion.
I'll jump in first and at least kick it off. So one of the challenges I think that we often face in these kinds of circumstances is that the idea of the label ecosystem builder is a label that we might apply to somebody else, but that person may not recognize that they are part of that ecosystem and are in fact participating in the building of it. So, so for instance, it's sort of a separate initiative, but it's an example. We're in the process of attempting to organize a group of ministers across churches in rural North Carolina around the discussion around the day after, things start to open up, and what's that going to look like in terms of their parishioners, but also in terms of their local economies. Now, ministers don't ordinarily think in terms of local economies. They think in terms of the care and feeding of their flock, but not necessarily what that means in terms of the context of the economy. I see them as having a critical role, and in helping to build, rebuild what may be left, or how things are left as we start to emerge from this pandemic. So it seems to me that part of this engagement is in appreciating that there are people who aren't part of the self-referential group, and then you bring them in to the conversation and appreciate what knowledge they bring to them, and then make the connections in the course of that conversation. So to me, it's it's just appreciating that it's our label for something else or for somebody else, and they may not find themselves in that group. I see a couple of heads nodding and a deep silence. Have I answered the question in there? We go on to something else now?
That's an interesting phenomenon. I can see, I think it does resonate. So maybe say again, since I'm scribing here and I'm already failing at that massively, I think. What's the biggest takeaway that you have from that? What can we learn from your experience on that? The working with the ministers.
We haven't tried this with the ministers yet, but in terms of other contexts, I mean, we're working on how to do that. But in terms of other contexts, I think it's sort of putting aside my own arrogance in the thing, and sort of saying, well, you're that. This is the label that you carry, and in that respect, it almost kind of denies what it is that the person is, what that group is doing. So it's more of expanding, sort of creating an environment where people feel that that what they have to contribute actually is part of a larger community, and then work from that. So you're putting it on their terms, not on your own terms.
In economic, I remember years ago being exposed to asset-based community development model. And one of the things they do is going into communities and helping people see they have a lot more personal resources in the community than they realize. They don't realize they don't realize what they can bring to the table that would be valuable. And it was quite striking when you get sort of, even a very small community, you can get a tremendous critical mass of expertise that nobody, I mean, people, yeah, I know how to do that. I just didn't know it was important. Is that what you're talking about?
And it's also part of design thinking too. I mean, so if you talk to the folks who do design thinking, it's, part of that too is observational. So the people who are engaged in it, real design work can take hours and hours and days of observation, which then is reflected back to people that you're engaging with. But also it's part of the design work or design thinking is to draw out, appreciate that there is expertise in the room. It's just, your job as somebody who's trying to facilitate this to recognize and appreciate what that other expertise is. So in the context of ESHIP and entrepreneurial ecosystems, somebody who is starting a nail salon might not think of herself or himself, but typically herself, as an entrepreneur. She's starting up a business, and this is something that she's interested in doing and she wants to get it going and so forth. The label of entrepreneur is a label that we put on that person. And how that person then fits into the larger whole is something that probably doesn't concern them, except if they can see how that participation actually can be leveraged into something that grows her business or what have you. So it's our label for that, not her label necessarily for herself.
I love that. Thank you so much, Peter, for sharing. There's a story that Hassan told me about in Detroit, and I don't know if Hassan will, not particularly about Detroit, but Dearborn, where the importance of asking the people that are there. I don't think we ask people questions nearly enough, right? We make assumptions about solving a problem, or that and not seeing what's directly in front of you. Hassan, will you share with people the story that you told me about Ford and how they tried to get more people how Dearborn tried to get more people interested. So.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to share that if this video is. Can you hear me?
You need to hold the microphone closer.
Can you hear me? Actually, I'm going to.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Well, if this video is public, I don't know if I want to. If it was just us talking, I would go into, yeah, I mean, without going into details, I think sometimes people, and it's nothing, I don't think it's anything that everyone on this call hasn't experienced in one way or another. I think sometimes, like what Celia described, people make assumptions about what is needed in community without actually talking to the people. And then so we've had projects that have launched, initiatives that have launched, and community was not involved in the process. And then when the projects get launched, it's all the blowback hits and people are at a loss as to why the project didn't take off or why it didn't work out. And it's primarily because there was nobody was asked for input. Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to share the story. I don't know how much detail I want to get into on a.
No, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No worries.
You know,
It's a great story.
We don't want to go to a virtual funeral for you.
No, we don't
I
want
do
to.
have I do have the black suit, but it's unfortunately it's a cleaner's, so I'm not sure I can go pick it up. So please don't get yourself killed. Yeah, the snot asking, and I seen that here and elsewhere in the Northwest, is that the people who are doing this, they go ask. They think they're asking the entrepreneurial community, but they're basically asking the usual suspects.
Exactly.
That the people they know already. That one sort of counterexample is our in Idaho, the Governor's Advisory Council for business, or all the people who they're on there because they bitched and moaned about things, and like in the Boy Scouts, bitching equals volunteering. So we've got actually got a lot of sort of ornery, contrary views. But when we can tell, I was really excited that Canada decided they were going to reinvent their national innovation policy, and they were going to crowdsource an amazing document that was going to map out, here are the priorities and processes that we need to advance to make a more innovative Canada. So they crowdsourced it. The original draft, they had six different people working on it, and then they put it online as a Google Doc you could comment on. Well, the 6 people that they acquired were basically all from the same office, and when anyone commented on it online, you got attacked. And I still remember when they said, don't you know it is proven fact that Canada doesn't need any more entrepreneurs? We don't need any, I was like, what? And it was quite frightening and made us think, okay, well, maybe we don't have to worry about Canada as a competitor. But it was very well-meaning. I mean, that was the hilarious part. Well, I guess what's hilarious now is that if you're going to ask people their opinion, you also have to be open to the fact that they may tell you you're wrong. And I've tried in my life to cultivate people who kick me under the table when I say something stupid. I don't like being kicked in the shins or higher up, but how do we, I guess, how do we broaden that conversation so we make sure we do ask the right people? That it's, and I know, because we're all guilty of, okay, who do I know I can ask about this? And how do we keep broadening that conversation? And, that's something I'd like to think I do a good job of, but I'm sure I don't. So what advice do y'all have on that? How do we how do we get more people in the conversation? It's not just listening, it's hearing what they're saying and taking advantage of it as best we can.
One opinion or observation, because I think that we're hitting on part of Cecilia's challenge, which is what are the barriers to inclusion and getting the right working groups working together. I can share part of 2 stories that may help answer some observations from my end that may be useful to this. When working on a project in Colombia, one of the things we found was that each of the groups fought over the money. And our project was to create a roadmap for the future, and they were looking at 5 to 10 years for this region. And they may have up to $50 million plus to invest in the region to utilize for innovation, entrepreneurship, and the next generation of growth. We invested in a small project about a third of our time researching everyone's views and then creating a workshop so everyone else locally could listen to it. We were the round eyes from outside the area and intentionally used nobody local to do the interviews with us. We used people from out of the area. And that had 2 benefits that we observed. One is it allowed us to adjust to their language, not them to ours. And 2 was we had to create information that was shared publicly in the community there, and they had over 40 stakeholders. And what we found out was most of them didn't know what each other did. And therefore, by sharing it, it took a time of percolation. In fact, we ended up having to extend the project by several months because they had to discuss with each other because they didn't know they were overlapping or trying to tackle something similar or had real issues. So the conclusion point on that one was, like painting in a house, a third of the time is in preparation. And most people hate that. They want to get into the painting. And therefore you have to clean up everything and look in every corner, every edge, pull up stuff that may have been damaged and repair it before you start any work on ecosystem building. So the key observation we learned from this one project was you have to dig deep. The second one is just a quick potted trilogy of 3 points that we took away is, one is you have to have a shared language. And that doesn't start by you having a language and inflicting it on other people. A shared language is one that you build together. And that's why families are families. You can tell they're successful because they have their own language, not because one person dictated it to everybody else in that family. 2 is that there's a focus. And as an example today, I think Peter brought it up, the day after is a focus. It's a very specific thing that says, what do we do next? Not today, but in the future for something. And the third one is a call to action that is related to honesty. And therefore it has to have a trigger point. So if you ask an alcoholic, do they need help? They have to admit they're an alcoholic first. Until they do that, you can't help them. And in most communities, until they admit they need help, you can't push them to change. You can only organize the information till they're ready to change. So the 3 points I would suggest are, you need common language, you need a focus, and you need a trigger, not just you being engaged to help them. So on that, I'll shut up.
Scott, to that I'd probably add, those 3 are excellent. And maybe it's the 4th that I'm thinking about would be encompassed in one of the 3, but it's also ownership. And maybe it's incorporated into language and so forth, but I think it's also sort of a distinctly separate act because, for instance, as long as you can deflect your problem onto somebody else, or say you're the victim and somebody else is the one that's creating the problems for you, then the things that you can control, you don't even look to control because you just have said, well, I'm not owning this issue. So I think that there's that is a fourth piece, but I don't mean to intrude. And again, you probably described that in the three, but I just think that it might stand alone as a fourth.
I think it's good that you raised that one, and I'll pose that I think it's in the three, but it is a fourth, and I'll make the distinction. There is ownership for today, and there is ownership for a future. There are people that only want to own the way it is today, the status quo, and they do not want to change. There are other people that are owners towards a better future, and they're different than the owners of today. So we typically put ownership as a how, not a right.
So I'm going to challenge. So I appreciate the discussion about ownership, but then sometimes that translates into ownership of project or ownership of action, which doesn't necessarily help. You have the people that created the problem that are going to solve the problem. Well, they don't necessarily have the perspective and the mindset to bring it further. There is a need for ownership. Don't get me wrong. I think better than ownership, there needs to be a recognition of the roles that they played in what happened, or just the fact that what happened is an issue, right? So you have to recognize that the system isn't working. So we talk about the fact that especially in DEI circles, the system isn't broken. The system works perfectly well for the people that the system was built to work for. So the recognition is that the system doesn't work for other people. That's the problem. So the system, and then the people who the system works for need to recognize that, oh, yes, that means that I'm making sure that my demographic, my group, my tribe, whatever, moves ahead of the other people. But that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to do it so that you help and benefit the people who you care about, right? The whole thing is trying to broaden that where it doesn't impede on helping other people move forward as well. And I know Dia had something she wanted to share as well, so I want to turn that over to her. But does that make, Amy's like nodding her head. So before we get into what Dia talks about, if you've got any comments, Scott or Scott Resnick or Amy, that you want to share on that part, that would be great too.
I'll add a rejoinder. We learned something from the military about after action reports that takes away part of the ownership issue. And one of the things we've observed is if you try to find owners, you get anchors. If you try to get observations, you can make them independent of ownership and have them just observe the situation as an independent party. So the military, after they do something, have an after action report that they normally do together, and they take off their stripes, whether you're the most senior or the most junior, and you say, you missed your target. And that's not a blame, it's just, that's what happened. And the reason that the distinction of ownership taken away from that became important for us was it allowed people to then say we could learn versus justify. And ownership is always part of this because we're all egos and we're tied to things we do. But if you treat it as you're looking at it without the personality of having to defend it, you tend to get a much cleaner observation. While I'll take Peter's point, there is an ownership requirement go forward that says, if you're going to make it happen, you have to have somebody that owns the project or owns the action or owns the doing. And Norris would agree that strategic doing is more important than strategic talking.
Great. I know Amy and Dia, you've got stuff, I want to make sure that we give you space to share.
Sure. I was just going to add that I think to a very basic principle, it just comes back to the concept of trust. Once again, whether all the concepts that we discussed this morning, and that leading to intentional inclusion as well as collaboration. Because sometimes we've seen, and I think it was Alistair who had a presentation and had some really, really good points on that. Just that people can come with a mind of skepticism, but it's really all our job to make sure that we display that level of trust for them to be comfortable bringing their expertise to the table, and for it to be a mutually beneficial exchange, if that's even a good word for it. And that's something we have seen locally as well. Because just in general, like with EDOs, I think more and more economic development organizations are having that entrepreneurship innovation role in it, but there still seems to be like a distinction between what they call traditional economic development versus the entrepreneurship side. But and it's not that we are trying to create a new concept. It is within economic development. So building that trust, I think, could be important.
Great, thanks. Amy, you added some stuff in the agenda. Thank you. Will you help us explore a little bit more?
Yeah, I first wanted to apologize to you, Cecilia. I did bad note taking because I was listening to you and thinking at the same time, and so you should get in there and make it your own. I kind of sort of accidentally added my own thinking as I was listening to you.
No, it's good. It's hive mind.
Yeah, I think all I really wanted to say was I just really appreciate what you were saying, sort of 100% to that idea of riffing off the idea of ownership. And I know we've got a number of definitions happening here, and I'm down with the strategic doing ownership too. But just that the riff that you took to the fundamental understanding about how the system is working as designed, but it's not working for enough people, is something that is pretty central to the way that we think about this work. And it's just important. You know, there's a really old sort of community organizing refrain that I continue to go back to, which is that whole idea of, are we, is this outreach or is this linkage? Right? Like, so when we enter a community, and a lot of this work sounds like at some point there are leaders who are entering a space, just really inviting people in as soon as possible to help make the thing, rather than have the thing and invite people to join. That there's just a real difference in positioning and ownership and vibe and sincerity and trust, but all of that. When there's a sincere, we've only made part of this, or we have some ideas, what are you already making? Can we work, you don't have to join our thing, but can we support what you're making already here in this place? There's a different vibe between outreach, like join me, or join me or join you, anyway, I probably need another cup of coffee, but that vibe seems really important. And I'm wondering if that sometimes gets missed in some of the kind of work that y'all are talking about.
I think that's spot on, totally. Scott Resnick, I know you're having some connectivity challenges. Are you able to share some thoughts with us?
Yeah, I'm sitting back and listening. Can you hear me? Can folks hear me right now?
A bit.
Anybody nodding? Is this better?
Yes.
I have 3 Zooms going on in my household right now. So, okay. So, I wanted to say that I think COVID puts a very different lens on who is doing what right now in the community, and how individuals step up and step into a place of leadership. One thing I just note is sometimes we see traditional leaders stepping into this role, and sometimes we see new leaders forming. And the new leaders have always had this potential. It's not that they woke up one night and became a new leader. There was a particular call to action that was greater than their own, and now that they are here. So, when you get into different challenges of bringing people together, there may not be that focus or that cause that triggers someone to step up and say, now I'm going to be a leader. I guess some of my issues and experiences just may be different on this front, just watching and listening to where this conversation has gone thus far.
No, that's a valid point. I think it does take a different form of leadership than the ones that maybe we've recognized historically. Like leading in an ecosystem isn't necessarily leading from the front, right? It is, I like what Scott Gillespie was talking about AARs. I'm reading or listening to Margaret Wheatley in Who Do You Choose to Be? And she talks about the Army's initiative on AARs, the after action reports, and taking on that where all the people are leading, right? They're leading in different ways. And Andy, his favorite term, which I've adopted, is you're leading in your custom and bespoke ways. So it's how you come and what you can contribute to this is basically what we're calling ecosystem building. As opposed to Norris and I identifying those as like the ecosystem builders and then the ecosystem builders. So where does that's leading in tandem, leading from behind, walking alongside. It's all different ways that this happens, right? So it is not necessarily hub and spoke, which is really interesting because the hub and spoke model. Scott, I'm going to mute you for now because I hear some noise. So, or maybe that's Nora's. So what I'm seeing is that that there's this give and take on how we organize depending on the situation. When we try to help support the community in coming together with solutions in COVID, almost it doesn't feel like almost a month ago, right? But it was almost a month ago, to think about how we can get as much useful information out as possible. But how do we collect that? And usually around ecosystems, we've been talking about a nodal system where there are pockets of people that are doing things and you just connect the nodes. With the information for COVID and the response for entrepreneurs and ecosystem builders, we needed more of a funnel. It's almost like a hub and spoke model, but I think it was more channeling together. And so a couple of us coming out of the Startup Champions Network created an online Facebook page that was very open source, where anybody can contribute, but trying to focus very narrow on what are the responses for ecosystem builders in support of entrepreneurs and small businesses to respond to the COVID crisis. That was a very specific ask. It got a little broad and sometimes went off the rails a little bit, but trying to keep that focus where we could collect all the information and you can take bits and pieces that you need and share it out, right? And so sometimes universal support means that there is some kind of funneling that gets done, and it's not synthesized by us or filtered by us, except when it falls off the rails. Does that make sense? So it's a very counterintuitive model to what we think about this grassroots ecosystem building thing is a lot of the framework that we put around. So, so any thoughts on that? Or is that a lot more to think about? What I want to propose as a topic for next time, in the next 6 minutes that we have, is this conversation that Scott and I have had on several occasions about languaging. So I can, if this sounds like it's of interest to you, have like a person from National League of Cities and have Scott Resnick and Skylar Yost and maybe Eric, since he's worked for a city before, to talk about how to engage with civic leaders. It should revolve around what we think about for. So here's a question. Somebody said that that one of the things that needs to happen for nonprofits and foundations right now is to get very political. And maybe it's not political as much as we need to get that message out to people that have the ability to influence policy. So if that's something of interest, and I know Dia's brought up before, and we would ask Jason Weens and his team, who works on policy at the Kauffman Foundation around America's New Business Plan, to discuss. So the good news is that Jason is on paternity leave, so he is not available at this point, but maybe closer to being off of paternity leave by that time. If it's not May, then it will be in June. So those are topics. Just let us know. And then I know Norris wanted to talk about projects. So Norris, can we talk about projects really quick before everybody goes away, and everybody think about it, and maybe decide on Slack or bring something up on, like which of these ideas resonates to you, or throw it in the agenda, like which one you'd vote up or down. That would be helpful. Norris? Projects?
Well, my first project is finally figuring out how to mute and unmute myself better. Something came up on another call, and I don't remember which one, but sort of this distinction between sort of team now and team next. Was that on the sync call or go by? Anyway, one of the other calls is focusing, there one way to jumpstart a lot of these projects. I think a lot of the conversations are, okay, how do we, what can we do right now? And I'm not saying that the virus is an excuse, but that what is it that how do we apply some of these projects? Is we have is figuring out what to do, and strategic doing is better than strategic talking. Tactical doing is even better. That what can we get going on? And there are a number of projects, and given the time, I would just check the canvases. There are a lot of things that we ought to be able to do without a lot of time and money to get going on, but also to be thinking about what's this going to look like when we come out the other side. We've got a number of Goal 5 has too many projects at this point in terms of campuses. One of the things maybe we should think about are the campuses the right way to it doesn't seem to be triggering action. So what can we do? Because this is the universal support goal, and focusing on ideas that bring people together. For one is simply teaching. There's a lot of sort of old school strategic tools out there for mapping and managing your stakeholder relationships. And we have stakeholders we don't know we have who could be very helpful, or we could be very helpful to them. Is figuring out what it is we want to get behind. In Goal 5, sent out a survey to people who've been attending the calls and getting a sense of what their priorities are. And one thing that's a fun takeaway is I asked them which goals should they, do you think we should most collaborate with in goal 5, and goal 6 was one of the winners of the lottery, I guess, on that. people on 5 want to work with 6, 7, and 1. So, but think about what could let me phrase it this way, that what could goal 6 and goal 5 do together that might jumpstart things short term and long term? Give it some thought and holler back to me at your convenience, because it is going to take some thinking, some contemplation. But I just appreciate having, you know, Zoom calls with sane people. Most of my Zoom calls are not with people who are going stir crazy. So thank you for all that, and I'll shut up.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I think what Amy said is timely, and so we might look at that. I'd like to, and Peter, I really think that talking about what you're working on a goal 7 calls about sustainable work, because you're talking about future work and sustainable work are one and the same. We can't talk about one or the other, one without the other. So so maybe the team that's working on goal 7 will loop everybody in. If you can, will you share with me an email, just a quick, very high level, this is what we're discussing or getting ready to discuss or wanting to discuss, and see if we can't get some people on goal 7 to engage in that conversation, because that's coming up next week.
Yeah, actually, limiting to about 20 or 30 people, 20 people or so, but we're planning a meeting on Tuesday next week of people in the social innovation space here in Chicago or Cook County, to talk about day after issues, and to start to pool their own observations, knowledge, and use this as a peer-to-peer exchange. And a lot of that, obviously, in terms of, you know, what's the role of entrepreneurship and social enterprise in looking towards how do we start to even restart local economies, and particularly at the neighborhood level. So,
well, Peter, that I had a sort of random chat we can have a go with the the chief economist of the Small Business Administration, and back in the last recession, that he did a study of what explained why some companies came out of and some communities came roaring out of the recession and others didn't. And a lot of it really came down to the people who are willing to innovate, to rethink what they're doing, to reinvent themselves, had been pretty powerful. They found the same thing back in the 2001 recession that had been compounded by 9/11. That there are a lot of people thinking about people who plan ahead, that in these and get their business models right, get their strategies right early on, in advance, do better, whether this is a community, and I think that would apply to a neighborhood. The people who sort of take control of their own destiny and start thinking about it. This is like, it's not quite Isaac Newton using the time to turn himself into the world's premier mathematician, but it certainly works. And this came up on the Slack channel, that companies that in fact, who are born in recessions, if they survive, tend to do better because they've gone through the crucible. And at one point, there were 25 of the 30 Dow Jones stocks. I remember these are the 30 largest market cap companies in the world. 25 of them had born in a recession. 26, if you counted Hewlett Packard, but Hewlett and Packard Mr. Hewlett and Mr. Packard disagreed mightily on the actual their company. But I think there's a lot of hope. And how can we help people both companies and neighborhoods to reinvent, to innovate, and be ready for the day after.
I think that's a very important and important topic to address, and maybe that's what we can talk about on a sustainable work call. I do want to focus on the fact that sustainable work not only means for the economy in general and for entrepreneurs and small businesses, but really sustainable work in Goal 7 is focused on entrepreneurial ecosystem builders. You know, one of the things that we shared on the reminder was Jeff Bennett's blog post about ecosystem builders being needed now more than ever, and the crucial thing is that a lot of entrepreneurial ecosystem builders are losing funding, not because they were creating some traction along the way, but now economic development money or support money is shifting as opposed to being distributed in addition. So that's something else. The other part is we can't necessarily solve for specific localities, but we as a group that gets together can help create some kind of framework and scaffolding that may work in. So the ideas of the ESHIP goals is that this is fractal work, so it works in small communities and it works across the world, right? So using the framework is applicable to both sets. So I want to make sure that we're thinking about it very system wide, as opposed to specifically what can we do to help, you know, say Cook County. Not that we don't want to help Cook County, but we've got to take the learnings of what we learned at Cook County to apply them to places like New York and Boise, Idaho. So it's how we work as ecosystem builders who have this. I mean, you've got this unique ability, and we've got this unique group of people that are actually looking at it across the field. So what can we do that's not going to be done or addressed by other groups? So I want to be mindful of everyone's time and give you back the rest of your day. I think that this is like the beginning, the middle of amazing conversation that we need to keep going forward on. So if you have anything else to add, if you'll please drop it into the agenda. And I love what you wrote, Amy. So will you kind of copy and paste what you wrote before I turn off the call to put it in the agenda? That would be great, so we can capture that. And I look forward to speaking with all of you more. Thank you so much for your time and energy, and have a great rest of your week.